The Wake Up Call with Cold Omaha on Minnesota's Sports Radio, 105 The Ticket.
Welcome back to the Wake Up Call. 105 The Ticket, 105.7, 105.3, 105.1 at 105 The Ticket on Twitter. My name's Sam Ekstrom, joined by Tom Schreier and Brian Dezelske and Luke Inman, our fantasy football experts. We're getting primed for football season. And with football season comes fantasy football season. Brian, I know you're in like 12 leagues. You will be with us all season long to impart your wisdom.
Fantastic.
On the Fantasy Football Podcast, which Tom Schreier is the host of, along with you, Brian. You're recorded here in the studio. Luke, you're going to be joining it this year. It's going to be a weekly juggernaut, the Fantasy Football Pod. Make sure you check that out on the 105 The Ticket website. But Tom,
real quick here, explain this league you're in, because you're in multiple leagues, but you are in a league with is it 64 people? I can never remember.
Yeah, I'm in a league that last year was 48. It's going to go up this year, another 12 teams. Basically, what the league is last year there was 6 conferences, and there was just 6 conferences. There was 2 divisions in each conference, basically, you break it down, there was a ton of teams in there, and basically, at the end of the season, there's 3 playoff tiers. The top tier, middle tier, bottom tier. You can kind of figure out, judging by a fantasy record, where you would wind up in what tier for playoffs or whatnot. But, last year I made it to the finals of the top tier league and promptly bombed in the championship game. And
you had an option because you were playing against a team that was like a tandem, right? And you had the option to split, and they actually chose not to.
I offered the chop, and when I offered the chop, they came back a couple days later, said no. I knew right away that I was going to get crushed, and of course, Andrew Luck gets benched in like the 2 minutes left in the third quarter. It was just a terrible week.
We documented this. I think this is on the podcast.
We talked about it for like half the show.
Yeah. I'm more intrigued how the personnel works. So you have 48 teams, you said, last year.
There's each conference has their own draft. And then once you get into the playoffs, then you could potentially go up against teams that have identical players.
Okay, so it was 6 8-team conferences.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So
and each conference was broken down by a couple of divisions.
So what, you weren't drafting 5th wide receivers by the 3rd round? Wasn't that kind of draft?
No.
Okay.
They're actually 8-team drafts. Like the draft was only 8 teams, but there's 6 conferences. So actually the teams are actually loaded, completely stacked.
How many leagues are you a part of?
I'm cutting down this year.
No,
I am.
So
you should.
So you're in like a dozen?
Well, I'm going to be
honest with yourself.
This
is the nest.
I'm going to be in the 8 range. I'm going to be in the 8 range.
And is it down from what?
That's down from 12, 13.
Okay.
It just
That's like a full-time job.
It gets to be too much because you know when you're playing head-to-head leagues, you're constantly going up against a guy that is on one of your teams, and they're absolutely crushing that week. Well, what are they doing to you in the league that you're facing them? They're crushing you. So it gets to be too much. So I'm cutting down on the leagues, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to convert the fantasy world into the all-play format. I'm a huge advocate of the all-play format. For the serious fantasy player, I think it's the only way to go.
Can you explain that real quick?
Yeah. The all-play format essentially is the league plays, it's almost based like a standard points league, but the league plays everybody every single week. So if you're in a 12-team league, right, and you have the high points for the week, you essentially would be 11-0. So at the end of the season, your record would look something like a Major League Baseball team's record.
Interesting.
And it's actually a really cool setup because what it does is it guards against a lot of the craziness that takes place in fantasy football, such as the guy who goes, say, 3-9 in his fantasy season, right? But he's the 3rd highest scoring team in the league. Why shouldn't that guy or girl, whoever's running the team, be in the playoffs have an opportunity to take that high. They obviously drafted well. They obviously did well throughout the season and picking up waiver players. Why shouldn't they be in the playoffs, or at least have an opportunity to get into one of the last seeds in the playoffs? So it guards against that. The cream of the crop rises to the top essentially in this format, and that's kind of my focus now. The leagues that I am in, I'm trying to convert. I got a lot of stubborn people in some leagues that just aren't having it, but I think over time eventually I'm going to get them all to convert.
Let me ask you this.
Sure.
12 leagues, maybe bump it down to 7 or 8. We'll see what happens. You got a lot more time on your hands. There's a popular format, FanDuel, DraftKings. Did you flirt around with any of those types of formats as well? Because that's getting really popular as well.
Yeah, there's guys, and I keep saying guys, there's people in the fantasy community that are hardcore DFS players, and I more or less dabble recreationally. I don't get it.
Not into that stuff, man.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not real big into the DFS thing. But I'm getting into it more and more, and hopefully this year I'm going to try a lot more than I did last year. Last year I was just doing some small tournaments, 20 team tournaments in weekly football. I'm going to try and get into some NBA DFS this year and see how that plays out. I don't know anything about NBA DFS, but I'm reading up and stuff like that, so we'll see what happens.
Brian, you brought the numbers here. You brought the tips for all of the drafters who have their drafts coming up here in the next month to 6 weeks. So let's hear some of the trends to expect this year in fantasy football. I know you've got it in front of you.
Yeah, well, I got 3 players that I want to point out that there's a lot of talk around one. I'll get to him at the end, but a couple of guys that haven't really been discussed much this year. One being Brandon LaFell, wide receiver for the New England Patriots. Right now, he's got an ADP, average draft position, of somewhere in the middle of the 9th round. And when you're in the middle of the 9th round, you get a number 1 wide receiver who's catching passes from Tom Brady. To me, that's a fantastic value. I'm taking that all day long. We saw what he did last year, over 950 yards, 7 touchdowns, and that's not catching a pass in the first 2 games of the season. So I think he's poised to have a really good year. Personally, my opinion, if he gets a full season healthy, having a year in that offense with Tom Brady, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a Jeremy Maclin type season like Maclin had last year. 10 touchdowns, almost 1,300 yards. So get Brandon LaFell if you can get him in that 9th round.
Why do you think he's so low?
Because he's just not a name. There's other players. There's other players that are. Take a look at last year. All those rookie receivers that exploded. Everybody's talking about the Odell Beckhams, the Mike Evans, those guys. So this guy.
Benjamin.
Yeah, those guys are kind of taking all the headlines, and a guy like Brandon LaFell is just quietly going to put up a really nice year, and I think that's a guy fantasy owners should really be keen on this year. Another one, talking about rookies, ton of talk last year about Odell Beckham, Kelvin Benjamin, blah, blah, blah. Not many people realize this, but Landry led the Dolphins with 84 receptions last year, and that was with Mike Wallace down there. Greg Jennings is there now, but he's getting a little bit older. Kenny Stills comes over from the New Orleans Saints, but he, in my opinion, is a one-trick pony, pure deep threat. I like Landry a lot this year. He's going somewhere in the, depending on PPR standard league formats, he's going in the 5th and 6th round right now in mock drafts. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy hits 100 catches this year if he stays healthy. I think there's a lot of value there with Jarvis Landry. And the guy that I have trending down for me personally, he's getting a lot of pub because he's now with the New Orleans Saints, is C.J. Spiller, pairing him up with Drew Brees in that offense. Obviously, Sean Payton in that offense, they can put up points in bunches. He's going right now in that late 4th round in standard leagues and late 3rd round in PPR leagues, but the reality is the guy can't really ever stay healthy. Missed a month and missed quite a bit of last year. A little over a month.
Got hurt in the Vikings game.
Right. Yeah. Him and Fred Jackson both got hurt that game. Yeah.
Yeah. Carnage.
Yeah. So he does have added value in PPR formats, but only has 2 seasons really of over 250 receiving yards, and he's only hit the 40 reception mark once in his career. Obviously, like I said, Breeze and Peyton help his case, but I believe that the check down guy, or the safety valve, if you will, for Drew Brees isn't going to be CJ Spiller as much as it's going to be a guy like Brandon Cooks, another rookie from last year, going to be second-year player this year.
He let me down on my fantasy team.
Cooks did?
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah.
Sad.
Benjamin, though. I mean, Kelvin Benjamin, that's my keeper. That's the guy I'm going to have on my team for the next 4 years.
Stash him for years.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. Luke, let's get to you before the break here. Yep. We heard the voice of Brian Dezelske at Brian Dezelske on Twitter. Great information from him. Who are a couple of your hits going into this fantasy draft season?
Right. Well, it's still a running back league. You got to get 2 good running backs. I mean, that's been the philosophy in fantasy football for the past 38 years, whenever they started that. And now we're seeing, though, that it's a passing league. So what that means is you can get quarterbacks, solid quarterbacks, Phillip Rivers, Ryan Tannehill, Teddy Bridgewater, these guys near the end of your drafts, and stock up on those guys. Grab 2 or 3 of them, and they might pan out. You mentioned Kelvin Benjamin. I was super hot on him going into the year. Clearly the number 1 target there in Carolina. My Kelvin Benjamin this year, guy from Baltimore, late first-round pick, Rashad Perriman. Big guy, fast guy, lit the combine up. What you're getting over here is you're getting an aging Steve Smith, 33, 34 years old. He's really more of a decoy underneath route guy at this point. Rashad Perriman's going to be able to stretch the field vertically with Joe Flacco, but check this out. Mark Trestman comes in from Chicago over to Baltimore, and Torrey Smith is now out the door. Torrey Smith's 92 targets. Those are going to all go to Rashad Perriman at a guy that you can get, right, in the late 9th, 10th round. I think his ADP is about 109 because why? Receivers are a dime a dozen. I really like Rashad Perriman later in your draft as your number 3 receiver. Again, because he's going to be starting right away, and anytime you draft a first-round guy, they want him to succeed right away. Mark Trestman's going to fall in love with this kid, and Joe Flacco's finally going to have a guy that he can stretch the field vertically with that big arm.
What are the odds that Max Williams is a steal?
I love Max Williams. Clearly the number 1 tight end coming out of the draft just from a football X's and O standpoint. But, again, he's taking over the same spot. He's going to be the number 1 starter right from the get-go. Dennis Pitt is out. And, again, in Trestman's offense, when you look at a guy like, maybe Martellus Bennett, I think that he had close to like 85 targets. So it's one of those things where Max Williams, more than not only does he have the starting spot, but he's talented enough to do something with it, right? He's not just winning it by default. He's a hell of I think we all know here in the Twin Cities, he's a hell of a talent at the tight end spot. So
great hands. I could see him becoming a Jimmy Graham type threat down the road. We'll take you home with some more fantasy football discussion. Brian Dezelske and Luke Inman guest star, your stalwarts, Tom Schreier and Sam Ekstrom here as well. Fantasy football talk next. Don't leave.
The Wake Up Call on Sports Radio 105 The Ticket.